Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I know that people are still coming in, but hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Rose O'Hara Jolly, they, them, and I am so excited to welcome you to our first ever state candidate forum for our Climate, Jobs, and Justice series. We would like to acknowledge these lands of the Chena Dene, Salchat, and Otna people of the Lower Tanana here in the interior of Alaska. We honor knowledge and continued stewardship to the lands, waters, plants, animals, and communities that we share this life with since time in memoriam. I would like to thank all of our partners who have helped put this event together. There is a lot this year, which is also exciting. So thank you to the Alaska Center, the Nanook Diversity and Action Center, the NAACP Greater Chapter 1001 Fairbanks, Planned Parenthood Votes, Native Movement, Native Peoples Action, Alaska Public Interest Research Group, and the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition. Thank you so much. I would like to thank our candidates who are here from multiple interior state house and senate districts, and would like to thank all of you for watching either here in the Zoom with us or on Alaska Center's Facebook Live. So some housekeeping for everyone. If you are watching on Zoom, we are in webinar mode. So this means that we cannot see you or hear you, and you cannot accidentally unmute yourself. So feel free to stay in your comfy pants, fold laundry, or take a second to calmly solve a sibling dispute with your children, whatever you need. If you move your mouse or cursor over the video screen, you should see an option in the toolbar to chat. It'll be at the bottom. In the chat, you can decide to send a message just to us, so to panelists, or to panelists and all attendees. Please be respectful in the chat, but please let us know if you have any questions or concerns. Some key voting dates. We'll be dropping links in the chat for you to access all the information I'm about to share. If you requested an absentee ballot, the state has begun to mail them out. I know our house received ours yesterday. If you requested one and have not received it, you can track it at the link Ryan's about to drop. Or you still have until October 24th to request an absentee, or what a lot of people call a mail-in ballot, if you haven't yet. Absentee ballots must be postmarked by November 3rd. If you prefer, early in-person voting starts October 19th, or you can vote in person November 3rd at your polling location. And again, information on how to access all of that is in the chat, or you can go to the Alaska Division of Elections webpage. So great. I would like to introduce our moderators for today's forum. We have Alec Hirsch and Andrea Quinton, and with that, I will hand it over to them.
Thanks, Rose. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. It's terrific to be here tonight with Andrea co-moderating this event, the Climate, Jobs, and Justice Candidate Forum. What a wonderful opportunity this is for all of us to be able to hear a little bit more about the candidates and their positions. We're joined by several candidates who are running for statewide office, including Christopher Quiss and Jeremiah Humans and Grier Hopkins and Julia Nalitka and Marna Sanford. My name is Alex Hirsch. I'm a professor at the university. I serve in the Department of Political Science, and I'm joined by my co-moderator, Andrea. Andrea, would you introduce yourself?
Yes. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. A little just about me. I am a resident of Fairbanks for about 19 years, almost 20. State employee for 14 years, investigator with the state of Alaska. I am very honored to be here, and let's have some fun with this.
Awesome. So here is our agenda for the evening, and this is our format. So we're going to start with some introductions. So the candidates, you'll each have about a minute, just under a minute, to introduce yourselves. If you wouldn't mind sharing your name, your position, your chosen pronouns, and if you could respond to the question, what is one positive thing that you saw, did, or learned during this pandemic. And I would add, it'd be great if you could remind our listeners and our viewers what public office you're running for, so that they know that. After introductions, we're going to move on to red card, green card, which Andrea and I will introduce later. And then we're going to move on about 10 minutes after that into a long response section. And that's really the substantive portion of the evening. That's going to take us about 90 minutes to get through all the questions that we do have for all of our candidates. And then we're going to have closing remarks from our candidates. And that's going to be, again, about 30 seconds to a minute, just in that closing period for each candidate. Does that make sense? All right, so shall we begin? Christopher Quist, I see you first. Would you share with us, well, your name, your position, pronouns, something you saw that was positive from the pandemic, and tell us a little bit about which House district you're running for.
My name's Christopher Quist, he, him. I'm from Fairbanks. I serve on the Fairbanks North Star Borough Assembly along with Marna, and I am a candidate for Alaska State House District 1. And what have I learned that's positive out of the pandemic? I don't know, that's a tough one. I guess, I mean, I'm becoming an expert on teleconferencing. Hopefully that's a skill that is paying dividends in the future. Were those all the questions? Sorry if I missed one there. And do I get this? I'm sorry, I missed it. Is this the minute that I have to kind of just talk about? Okay, great. Thank you for that. So I'm running for Alaska State House District 1, I think in a very critical time here, to fight for Fairbanks, to fight for educational justice and environmental justice, and to bring common sense to the way that we are running our state, and to help craft a sensible and stable fiscal plan for the state, to fight for our fair share, and to help protect our environment, to make sure that we have a stable and sustainable environment for future generations here in Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Andrea, would you like to call in the next candidate?
Yes, I would. Jeremiah Humans, tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your pronouns, what you've learned that might be positive or saw or did, and a little bit about the district that you're running for.
Good evening. My name's Jeremiah Humans. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm running for House District 2 in the Alaska House of Representatives. The district consists of Fort Wainwright and Fairbanks and Badger. A positive thing that I've learned from the pandemic is how much our community wants to come together and help each other, from groups like Fairbanks Mask Makers coming together and helping the community provide the support for themselves. It's great. Another thing that I learned from this pandemic is how I will never be out of a job as a technology support specialist with all these Zoom calls and everything. It's just been, crazy times working in tech support. I'm running for House District 2. I'm a veteran. I served in the United States Army for 10 years, and I am looking for a chance to help serve my community and help come up with a sustainable fiscal plan to help address the climate crisis and the public safety crisis in Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Okay, I'd like to call in Julia Nalika next. Again, the questions are your name, your position, your pronouns, one positive thing that you saw, did, or learned during this pandemic, and then if you wouldn't mind reminding us which House district you're running for.
Thank you very much. I'm Julia Nelica. I'm from Nenana, which is on the lower Tanana-Tene lands. My parents are Jan and Charlie Nelica, and I go by she, her. I'm running for House District 6, the rural interior, because last year I had the opportunity to travel to 90% of the House district as a researcher. While I was traveling around the district, I kept hearing people say over and over again how they did not feel like their voices were being heard in Juneau. As I was listening, I formulated this plan to run for office. And so there's a couple of positive things that's come out of this COVID. Firstly, I got to learn how to run a campaign during it. And also my community came together and we started a weekly soup kitchen, which I've been able to be a huge part of. This has been really incredible, pulling together so many people around the community that we always have more food than we need and are able to distribute it throughout Nenana. And so I really appreciated that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you. Grier Hopkins. There you go. You want to give us a little bit about the district that you're running for, your name, your pronouns, and anything that you've learned, you've done, or you've saw during this pandemic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate it. Thank you to both the moderators and all the coalition of groups that have brought this on today and brought us all together, as well as all the participants. I see 48 of you and us online, so thanks everybody for coming out and learning. My name is Grier Hopkins. I'm the incumbent running for re-election in House District 4, which is Esther, Goldstream, Farmers Loop, Birch Hill, Steel Creek, and downtown Fox. I just missed the Fox water hole, but maybe in the future map. That's Julia's. So I go by he, him. And one positive thing that I have seen and learned in this pandemic is the resiliency of our educators. In my day job, I work for educators across Alaska from Point Hope to Utqiagvik down to Nenana and down to Cantwell and Fairbanks. And seeing them get put out into their homes right as the pandemic was hitting and the struggles they had to overcome last semester, and now the growth that they have made through as this next semester has started has been absolutely impressive. It's hard on everybody, it's hard on the students, it's hard on the educators and the families, but the improvements that they have made coming together, coming up with new plans and new ways of educating our students in creative methods really has been enlightening, and I look forward to seeing them continue to develop before we get our kids back into class.
Thank you, Grier.
Okay, last but not least, Marna Sanford. Marna, same questions.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. My name is Marna Sanford. My pronouns are she, her. I am a lifelong Alaskan. I grew up in Tok, Alaska, but I got to graduate from high school in Fairbanks and have thought of Fairbanks as my home for quite a while now. And I think that, I don't know if everybody would agree that this is a silver lining, but for me it has been. One of the things that I have worked on in my day job as government relations coordinator for Tanana Chiefs Conference, which is our tribal health consortium here in Fairbanks that represents a number of federally recognized tribes in the interior, is broadband. And I have been shouting to the wind, it feels like, for probably the last 4 years, trying to get people to see some of the things that are wrong with broadband and the way that it is serving the interior. Well, my silver lining is that everyone sees it as well, and they are on my train, the broadband train for Fairbanks. And it has been wonderful to see so many people speaking up. They're contacting me as an assembly person. They're contacting their local leaders saying, it is time that we get to a solution. And I'm excited that we've got this critical mass. So I'm hopeful that we can do something with it. And I'm hopeful that if I get to Juneau, I will also be able to do something about it. So thank you.
Thanks so much. So that concludes the introduction phase of the evening. Now we're going to move into the red card, green card portion of our candidate forum. And everyone has a red card or a green card, right? I know that Julia and Nalika, you have a red and a green object, right? That'll work. So Andrea and I recognize that some of you may be excited to offer some nuanced and dynamic answers to some complex problems facing the state. We appreciate that, and we'll have a whole 90 minutes tonight to just do that. But before we get into that, we are going to play a sort of game, and it's red card, green card. Green card is going to signify yes, an affirmative answer, an affirmative response, and a red card indicates no, right? Or you're against that thing that we're describing in some sense. So Andrea and I are just going to trade back and forth on these questions. It's meant to be kind of rapid fire. Probably you're all going to have instincts like, well, wait, I want to explain this. I want to explain that. No, you can't do that, right? That's just not on the table. You can't. It's totally unfair. That's my caveat. But we're going to do it anyway. And then when we get to the second longer form answer, feel free to justify what it was you were thinking earlier on. Okay, so that's what we're going to do right here, right now. Okay, so everyone get your cards ready. Again, your green card is going to signify yes, your red card is going to signify no. And here's your first question. Do you acknowledge the science behind climate change? And do you acknowledge that human activities are the main cause of climate change?
Okay, great. Second question. Would you support the establishment of state and tribal government-to-government consulting for projects being proposed on traditional tribal lands?
Okay. Third question, do you support Roe v. Wade, and do you believe that it should stand?
All right, great. Next one is a little bit long, but we'll make it through it. In October 2019, former Attorney General Kevin Clarkson ruled that the Alaska Employment Preference Statute, or better known as Alaska Hire, was unconstitutional. Alaska Hire requires certain private employers to hire a fixed percentage of qualified Alaskans for public work projects, or they face fines or imprisonment. Do you support the Alaska Hire statute? Great.
Okay, next question. Do you think that access to clean water and clean air are human rights?
There we go. All right. Another long one. We have 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska. However, our state does not recognize all of our tribes in state statutes or constitution. Would you sponsor a bill to recognize all federally recognized tribes in the state, in Alaska state statutes?
Okay. Perhaps you've heard of a just transition. A just transition is a framework for a fair shift to an economy that is ecologically sustainable, equitable, and just for all Americans. Would you support such a movement for the state?
All right, next one. Would you support legislation amending the state non-discrimination clauses to include the protection, sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender equality? Identity, I'm sorry. My daughter just said gender identity, sorry.
Okay, great. Next question. Do you support the right of Alaskan workers to organize and join a union? Thank you.
Okay. The Juneau Assembly just passed an ordinance requiring the creation of a systemic racism review committee. The committee will review legislation that comes before the Assembly to make sure it does not perpetrate discrimination or inequality in the community. Would you support or serve on a systemic racism committee in the legislature?
Okay. Do you support policies that allow healthcare providers, hospitals, pharmacies, or individuals to refuse to provide legal medical services based on personal beliefs?
Can you restate that, Alex?
Absolutely, I can. Do you support policies that allow healthcare providers to refuse to provide legal medical services based on personal beliefs? Okay.
Okay. Okay. Do you support the allocation of state resources to fund public housing for people? That's all it says. There we go.
All right. Would you support the creation of a special legislative committee on climate change, as proposed by Rep. Andy Josephson in 2019, with a core focus on holding hearings on and coordinating the legislative response to the climate crisis in Alaska? Okay.
Right. Would you vote to pass age-appropriate comprehensive sex ed in schools?
All right, last question. Do you view the climate crisis as a health crisis and that climate solutions are health solutions? Okay. That concludes the red card, green card portion of the evening. Andrea, do you want to talk about what this next section is all about?
So this next section is called the long response questions or section. You'll just have about 2 minutes to respond to each of these questions. We're going to read them and then we're going to call each of you in order and give you the opportunity to answer those questions. I do believe there's going to be a timekeeper. She's going to come on and she's going to prompt you when you get to about a minute and then wrap it up, and then she'll let you know when your time has expired. So if Alex, if you have nothing else to add, we can jump right in.
Let's do it.
Okay. The first question is, the climate crisis is an existential threat to Alaskan communities and the world as a whole that requires action at every level of society. There are many aspects of a comprehensive policy response to climate change, from helping Alaskan communities, particularly in rural Alaska, adapt to coastal erosion and wildfires, to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by decarbonizing our energy sector, to economic planning to account for our global shift away from oil use and a managed decline of production. What are the key policies you believe are needed to enact for a climate response in the short term, and what specifically would you what specifically would you champion to address the problem in this coming legislative session if you are elected? And so the first person we'll go to, let's start with Marner.
Thank you. So I actually, I think it's unfortunate that for a number of years, the state of Alaska has had a climate plan that has sat collecting dust on the shelves. And weirdly enough, under the Palin administration, there was a fairly comprehensive plan that engaged all types of stakeholders and talked about all of the things that you've just mentioned, Andrea, in your question. So really what we need to do is have somebody literally take it off the shelf and institute some of the recommendations therein. So that involves engaging stakeholders like our chiefs and our people in our tribal communities, our tribal health organizations, engaging community leaders from the coastal areas, from interior Alaska, and talking to them about what that's going to look like into the future. So some of that's going to be talking about moving their entire community, but some of it's also going to be economic development and how that's impacting their ways of life. We've already seen this year on the Kuskokwim and Yukon rivers that our fish counts are so drastically low that it's not just about a way of life, it's about living. They're not going to have enough to eat. And this is, in my opinion, it's directly related to changing weather patterns. So my first plan would be to engage with folks who are feeling these the most and take that plan off the shelf and start getting it into statute.
Thank you, Marna.
Great. Julia Nilika.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to echo what Marna had mentioned about the low fish counts and how that's impacting our families and our communities up and down the rivers and also on our coastal areas. We all have talked to somebody this summer who wasn't able to fill their freezer with the fish that they typically are able to. When I went to Circle a few weeks ago, I heard that they had only 4 days of open fishing up there. Their freezers are empty. And this is a huge problem. Like she mentioned, this is a way for people to feed their families and to live. I think in the short term, we really need to break down the information silos. We need to make sure that our agencies are talking to one another. We need to strengthen government to government relationships. And our state needs to understand more the programs that our tribes are working on and making sure that there is communication between them. One really exciting project in Nenana is we actually have a biomass plant going in there, and it is about the 10th one that has been built by the same gentleman who built the one out in Tok. And so they are getting really fine-tuned with how to make these biomass plants really work for communities. And this can also help to work on the wildfire problem, because these biomass plants, they can use also green wood as well, but also brush forest and things like that around communities. They can employ people to get wood for these. They don't need a certain type of pellets. And these new biomass plants can almost run to 0 carbon emissions. This is something that can work for almost all of our rural communities. And this is a program that we should be encouraging in our rural communities as a short-term, very concrete plan moving forward to address climate change and to also address the economic impacts, to provide jobs, and to have people understand how to run biomass plants as well. So there are so many creative ideas that our communities are doing all over the state, but opening up those communication lines and the information sharing is critical to make sure that we are able to all come together as Alaskans and move forward into new technologies. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Jeremiah Humans.
Right. I think the question starts this off the right way, that this is an existential threat to Alaskan communities, and that we need to start mobilizing every sector of our economy to start a just transition from an extractive economy to one based on regeneration. And that's going to take a lot of work from all the sectors, like I said, and it's going to need to be coordinated by a climate change committee in the government. Like Marna and Julia said, the salmon runs were bad this year I think all of us feel from climate change. My freezer's empty when I went down to Chitina. It was not a very successful year this year. We need to start working on transitioning these jobs on these oil producers to new green energy jobs. Whether it's from a Green New Deal that the federal government passes to a program in the state run. And we need to do that by fully funding education to train these people into these new jobs. And so that we can ensure good union paying jobs for all Alaskans. And it's going to take a lot of work, but we need to do it now because this is a threat to Alaska right now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Over to you, Christopher Quist.
Thank you. Thank you for asking the question. It's the most critical issue of our time, and we have to address it with everything that we can muster. I'd like to echo or associate myself with a lot of the comments that have already been made. And I'm particularly excited to hear biomass being part of the conversation, because I think that it's a significant part of the solution, especially here in the interior. When you think about burning trees, you think about, well, we've got a problem with air quality here, but naively, it's easy to think that that's maybe not the smartest way to deal with climate change, but that's carbon that's already in the carbon cycle. That's essentially green carbon. And you have, as opposed to extracted carbon from millions of years ago, bringing that into the carbon cycle. So it's a significant difference, and it's a solar resource that's regenerative that we have right here. So I think that looking to technologies new and old is definitely part of the solution and something that I will fight for. Additionally, we have right here in Fairbanks a real gem when it comes to combating the impacts of climate-driven changes, and that's the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We're on the front lines of climate change here, and we're also on the front lines of climate research. UAF is a world-class climate research organization, and I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that it is adequately funded, and those research programs and those research dollars are right here in Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And now we move on to Grier Hopkins.
Sorry, I just pressed the wrong button on my computer. Thank you for that question. One of the things that you had mentioned in your question was wildfires and how that impacts a lot of our rural communities. And in addition to erosion, and we are now seeing the first Alaska village being moved off of the eroding coastline back to a safer location that they can have a more sustainable community. And that's $100 million or so project that's partnered with the Department of Defense. So how do we avoid that into the future and protect our other rural villages? I wanted to bring up and follow up with that wildfire question, part of the question. Last summer we had the Shovel Creek fire just behind my house here. And there was a fire break that saved my house and my neighborhood and from devastation, and allowed the firefighters to utilize it to protect us. So I went down to Juneau and I used that experience to get an ongoing source of funding, $10 million this year, $5 million going into the future, to help our communities across the state plan so that we can build more of those fire breaks like we had behind my house, like Julia was talking about down in Delta, but also in rural Alaska, because the size of the infrastructure that came in and the amount of infrastructure that came in to fight that fire could not go out to a small village like a Huslia, like a Non-Dalton or a Dillingham even. Just the amount of technology it would take. So that money is going to help them plan ahead so that, it's not a forest management problem like President Trump keeps talking about in California, but because there are no trees out there, and we have to plan with the tundra, and we have to plan to be able to defend those communities from wildfires. So I was proud to have that money that's going to help our entire state. Additionally, in terms of getting off of the fossil fuel burning energy infrastructure, I worked to pass Senate Bill 123, which creates an integrated resource plan for the road system and the rail belt here from Homer to Fairbanks. And that helps bring on more renewables online. And we need to find ways to continue to fund that going into the future. We did a good job when oil was at $100, $120 a barrel, and we were able to fund a lot of these programs. And now we need to bring in more of those independent power producers, like we are seeing out in the Mat-Su, and also the biggest solar array in our entire state out in Kotzebue. And so we should find more projects like that, those public-private partnerships where we can plan ahead and bring more of those large, small-scale programs online. I think it's going to take a comprehensive effort, and we need to plan ahead on how we defend our communities as opposed to reacting.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on now to our second question as part of the long response portion of the forum. And this question is about justice and equity. The question is, many of Alaska's cities struggle with addressing the houseless and mental health crises due to a lack of state funding for adequate shelters and behavior, mental, detox, et cetera, health services. What is your plan for addressing these critical issues? And let's start this time with Jeremiah, just to mix it up.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we need to start with the simplest solutions. The state needs to provide adequate funding for these things. These are preventative measures that will cause, if we spend money now, we can save money in the future by housing the houseless, by giving food and funding food banks and expanding SNAP and healthcare for all Alaskans. It's pretty simple that it's cheaper to put someone in a house and provide them with the resources to improve themselves than it is to pay the police to come in and break up these homeless camps continuously and to provide the reactive response to these issues. We need to address the core part of these issues and not just go after homeless camps and go after the symptoms of the larger issues here. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to Julia Nalika.
Thank you very much. This is a huge question, and it's definitely answered in a different way, I believe, in our rural areas than in our urban centers. So in our rural areas, you know, we still deal with the same problems. We have housing shortages, we have substance abuse, we have lack of law enforcement as well. What we need to be doing is we need to firstly find out where the federal money is going. So last summer, Attorney General William Barr came to Alaska and he dedicated over $50 million to the law enforcement. But trying to track down exactly where that money went to and how it was distributed has been very challenging. We need to make sure that that money is distributed into programs that are helping all of Alaskans and that we are able to work on prevention grants and especially things that can be grown within the community, such as restorative justice circles. A lot of the problems that we have stem from a lack of education that then leaves our people without employment opportunities, often abusing substances because they do not have the pride of a job or housing even. And then they get caught up into a cycle where they often end up in prison and then back out on the streets again. We need to make sure that we are finding community-based solutions to bring those people who have maybe strayed off the path back into our communities. We need to be looking at how we can grow up our own law enforcement so they understand our community members. We need to have our communities involved in hiring those law enforcement officials to make sure that they are suitable for our communities. And we need to make sure that the people who do have brushes with law are able to be integrated back into our society with work skills, with pride, and with job opportunities afterwards. We cannot leave the people who wander off the path stray. We can't leave them hanging out there. We need to have them in our communities. We have a small population in a big, beautiful state, and we need to make sure that we are taking care of each one of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm aware that Mara Sanford can't be with us all for the whole remainder of the evening, so I do want to call on her next to give her an opportunity to weigh in on this question.
Yes, thank you. I apologize. I have a borough assembly meeting tonight. So actually, I really liked both Jeremiah and Julia's answers. And I would add that one of the things that we need to invest in fully and fully fund is education. And I think that not just education, kindergarten through 12th, but we need universal pre-K. And it is proven that with programs such as this, that we can often identify people with mental health issues earlier on and divert them into the right services that they need before it becomes a crisis. And oftentimes, when those people are identified later in life, they've already engaged in the juvenile justice system, perhaps, or any number of things that, as Julia mentioned, potentially lead them astray. So I know a lot of people who know my background know that I was a public advocate for a decade, and I'll tell you that the lack of addiction and mental health facilities in Alaska is shocking. And I know we talk about it all the time, but there are some pretty, well, I say easy fixes, but nothing is easy when you involve legislators. I'm learning this, but For instance, there is a waiver that you can get for how many beds a treatment center is allowed to have. And the Alaska Native Health Board has asked and sought this waiver to allow them to extend their services year after year after year. And these are the kind of things that once we know about them and join together and lend our voices to these really, I think, simple problems, simple fixes that would expand our capacity, that we start to make headway. So again, I'm gonna really harp on education as one really excellent mechanism, expanding capacity. And I also would just say that, to echo Jeremiah, we need to fully fund our criminal justice system. And that means everybody who's involved in that, not just yes, corrections is important, and yes, police officers important, but that means everybody who's involved in that. And those are social workers, public defenders, our district attorney's offices, and Office of Children's Services. Really important networks that are helping keep us together. And again, I apologize, I have to leave early, you guys, but I have an obligation to our assembly. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to go to Grier Hopkins.
Thank you again, and thank you to our two assembly members on here for the work you do locally. Local government is the closest to the people and makes the biggest impact in our everyday lives. You know, looking at housing and mental health equities, today the biggest provider of mental health in the state of Alaska is our corrections system. That's our jails. And we are looking right now at a bill that was passed, House Bill 49, that was the final rollback to SB 91, the criminal justice reform. And that bill locks more people, nonviolent drug offenders, up for longer. And I thought that was the wrong approach. So I was one of 2 votes in the entire legislature to vote against that bill. And, you know, it's a political hit, but I don't believe the war on drugs is working, because addiction and mental health go hand in hand far too many times together. And if we're not going to be supporting those individuals and trying to get them the rehabilitation services they need, the mental health treatment they need, and instead we're just going to lock them up, we're not going to do anything about solving this cycle. And today in our budget crisis, as we have to continue the downward pressure on the budget as we're looking for new revenue, one of the 2 non-formula driven budgets in the state that are going up are the Department of Corrections and the Department of Public Safety, for this exact reason. And I don't believe that's the right way to go about it. I think we need to find better solutions. The Foundation Health Partners, the hospital, TVC, and the Denali Center have been working together to bring more services for the behavioral health here in Fairbanks online. And that's not just Fairbanks that serves, but it's a regional hospital. So everybody in the interior region, the interior villages, come to Fairbanks for their support. And having that behavioral health access is absolutely critical. We also need to look at ways of continuing to support services like Housing First here in Fairbanks that the city of Fairbanks put online, and is housing chronically addicted individuals so that they can work to get on their feet and stop costing the system more. Community Service Patrol Van stops the arrests from happening at these individuals and gets them a safe, clean place to sober up for the night so that they don't then get arrested and continue this cycle. This is something that many people in the legislature support is the behavioral health funds. How do we find them, and how do we put those at a bigger priority than locking nonviolent drug offenders up for longer? Has to be the priority that we come forward with when we go down to Juneau in January.
Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, Christopher Quist.
Thank you. So many good answers to this question already. I mean, there's so many things that we can and need to do to help solve these problems. And I think that on the long term, as I already mentioned, one of the biggest solutions to this here is universal pre-K. And we just need to look long term, and over the course of 20 years, we'll see these differences, but we need to look past the next election cycle. I mean, we'll see differences sooner than 20 years, but like the biggest impact, full generation of people that are coming up through a system that's taking them from pre-K, through vocational school or university. Also supporting working families so that they can take care of their family. We also need to support our municipalities and not have a adversarial role between the state and, here in District 1, the city of Fairbanks, that helps provide really essential services like Housing First. And so we need an all of the above strategy. We need, like was mentioned, we need to do everything that we can to end the war on drugs, which has been an unmitigated failure and essentially a war on minorities and a war on poor people. And it's completely unjustifiable. So investing in education, making sure that our mental health care facilities are funded, that we're not delivering mental health care through the criminal justice system, and yeah, really taking a long-term approach as well so that we can grow a healthy society and taking care and begin by taking care of those that are most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Andrea, do you want to ask the next question?
Yes. So the next question is going to be based around healthcare. And the question reads, many in Alaska face barriers when accessing reproductive care. Some of those could be addressed by the legislature. During the last session, bills were introduced that attempted to further limit access to abortion care. In addition, bills expanding access, such as access to birth control, failed to even make it to the floor. As an elected official, what will you do to make sure all Alaskans have access to comprehensive care? What bills will you champion? What about access to 12 months of birth control? And let's start with Jeremiah Humans.
All right. Well, I'll start this with reproductive health care is health care, and limits, and the legislature putting limits on this health care is not in the best interest of Alaska. We need to be able to expand all health care to Alaskans. I would prefer a federal, Medicare for all solution, but we need to make sure that all Alaskans have the ability to get the health care that they need. I would oppose any constitutional bans on abortion in Alaska, and I would fight for an expansion of healthcare. We need to make sure that people have access to the care that they need to be able to live full and honest lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julia Nelica.
Thank you very much. Women deserve privacy. Women deserve to be able to have a discussion between their doctors, between their families, between their spiritual guidance, and they don't deserve to have the government deciding what they cannot do with their bodies and with their reproductive health. Privacy is something that all Alaskans hold dear. In fact, it's been enshrined in our laws before Roe versus Wade was even passed. We have a right to privacy here in Alaska, and I will fight to protect for all Alaskans' right to privacy. As an elected official, I will not be trying to roll back the Medicare program. I think that especially now while we are in a pandemic, and whether or not we are, this is a program that helps low-income people be able to access healthcare, which is critically important, not just to them, but to all of us as a society. When people get so ill that they walk into emergency rooms because they didn't have access beforehand, what do you think happens? This becomes a drain on all of us because we all end up paying into the healthcare system. So we need to make sure that people are able to have access to the preventative healthcare so that they don't get so ill that they're waiting for the emergency room before they're able to visit a physician. This is this is such short-term thinking. We need to think in long terms of keeping people in our communities safe and healthy and contributing members of society for all of us. The last part of the question, what about access to 12-month birth control? Why would we not have access to 12 months of birth control? This is something, once again, that is a woman's choice. And this is a choice between her and her doctor, her family, and her spiritual guidance. So I don't think that there should be restrictions on women and the choices that they make with their bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and go to Christopher Chris.
Thank you. So as Jeremiah said, reproductive health care is health care. And I think that we're all in agreement here that health care is, and should be treated as a right. So that's something that we need to, I also agree with Jeremiah that ideally a lot of this solution is going to be coming down from the federal government in the form of a Medicare for all. But we can't, wait for that as we continue to fight for it. We need to do everything that we can here in Alaska to make sure that the services are being delivered to those that need them, and that everybody has access to healthcare, reproductive and otherwise. As Julia mentioned, privacy is enshrined here in our Constitution in Alaska, and that is something that we need to take seriously as legislators. Let's see, other parts of the question, what bills are relevant here? Well, my opponent is the co-sponsor of a fetal heartbeat bill that would essentially make abortion a felony in this state. And I mean, that is completely the wrong way to go. So I mean, I would oppose measures like that. Excuse me, I'm just trying to read the rest of the question here. So, I mean, I feel like I've got more to say, but I guess it's not coming to mind at the moment. I guess maybe I'll just mention one procedural thing. I asked the deputy presiding officer to run the meeting for the first hour, so I'm going to be able to stay with y'all for the duration, and then as soon as this is over, scoot over right across the street to run the meeting. So thank you.
Okay.
Grier, same question.
Thank you, Alex. Like a number of people talked about, is the protections in our Constitution. While the right to privacy in our state constitution that I wish was in our federal constitution protects our rights, in our bedrooms and in our homes and on our bodies for much of those decisions dealing with same-sex marriage specifically, it also has the equal protection clause in our constitution, and that defends the right for medical accessibility for abortion to women here in Alaska, and that has bedeviled conservatives across Alaska since it was put into our constitution. And I believe protecting that is absolutely critical. We can't pick and choose parts of our constitution that we want to support. We have to support it in its entirety. And I believe that is what we need to go down to Juneau to defend. That long-term birth control bill that you were talking about, I was a co-sponsor of that bill and strongly support it. Too many women, young girls, come into an urban center so that they can get access to birth control, only to go back out to rural Alaska where they don't have that same access to a clinic or to a doctor and can't get that prescription easily. Or they live in a home that's dangerous for them to continue going to the doctor. And so they need that long-term birth control, because as hopefully we have a question on comprehensive sex ed, people of all ages are sexually active, and we have to make sure they have the tools to stay healthy. Those bills that Christopher Quist was talking about, those did not get to the floor because we were part of a bipartisan caucus. I wish we could have pushed for bills that like the long-term birth control access, but having that caucus, the majority, being in the majority, we were able to stop those other bad pieces of legislation that were introduced just as a political maneuver halfway through the final session, right at the very deadline, the last day that you could introduce a bill. They had no intention of passing that. It was just playing politics with people's bodies, and I believe that's unacceptable. This campaign cycle, as well as my first one, I was proud to have earned the endorsement of Planned Parenthood here in Alaska. That organization does amazing work across the country and right here in Alaska that provides affordable reproductive health care to women and families and men too, to be able to get the services that they need privately and securely and safely so that they can have a healthy body. We shouldn't be telling people how or how not they can get their health care. Like Julia said, that's a decision between the individual and their doctor.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, next question. And we'll lead with Christopher just to mix it up. I think it's good for folks to have a chance to go last, right? It's good for a chance to have a chance to go first. We want to keep that varied as much as possible. So Christopher, we're gonna lead off with you for this one because I don't think you've got a lead up question just yet. Here's your question. What's your vision for a fiscally viable state of Alaska? And should the state move to a new tax structure as part of this future?
Yes, yeah. So I think that a new tax structure is definitely part of my vision, and I think a vision that's being shared by many people for a stable and sensible fiscal plan for the state. It means getting our fair share of our oil and gas tax revenue. And this isn't some kind of radical new idea, just our historic fair share of our oil and gas tax revenue. So I would say that passing Proposition 1 here in November would be a very good start. Failing that, we'll have more work to do in the legislature to undo the damage that's been done by SB 21. That right there is probably half of the problem, right? Or half of the solution to the problem. Alternatively, or beyond that, we do need to look to a broad-based progressive tax here in the state. And I think that I'm agnostic as to the details of that, as long as it is just that, broad-based and progressive, so that lower income earners in Alaska are paying less and higher income earners are paying more as a percentage of their income. And so there's a lot of ways that could be implemented. One could, to be a state income tax expressed as a percentage of your federal tax liability. We can, probably pick up a few $100 million there as well. And we also need to invest in education and grow our economy, and that combined with the other two measures, I think is an excellent start towards not only being able to fund essential state services now, and also to protect our sovereign wealth fund and grow that to be able to pay dividends to Alaskans, and to have a stable and sensible fiscal plan for the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to Julia Nalika.
I'm resting in that second place position. Great, thank you. So my vision for a fiscally stable state is not only just getting our fair share, but getting the maximum benefit guaranteed to us by our Alaska Constitution. We need to be looking at all of the industries. We have a pretty diverse economy, yet we don't have a very diverse economic base that we are drawing from. We've seen oil as something that we are able to sustain our state on, and that is no longer the case. But that is also because I believe that our past legislators have let us down. And now it's time for Alaskans to speak on if they would like to change the tax structure for the oil companies. We also need to be looking at the other industries that we have here in Alaska. We need to be looking at mining, we need to be looking at fishing, and we need to be looking at tourism and also our financial centers. So I will never, ever advocate for Alaskans, Alaskan workers, Alaskan industry, Alaskan owned, to suffer the brunt of taxes. But I do believe that we need to look at these bigger multinational corporations that come into our state that do not care about our resources, that do not care about our people. And we need to be making sure that if we accept them into our state, that we are receiving the maximum benefit, not just financially, but we also need to make sure that those companies are protecting our land, our resources, and our people for the long term. We need to stop looking at short-term solutions. This is why we are in this mess. The state needs to move, like I said, to investigating the industries, especially our extractive industries, all across the state, to make sure that we are getting our maximum benefit from them before we start looking to our people to supplement that. Thank you.
Great. Okay, let's go to Grier Hopkins.
Thank you. I almost got the last place position again. Thank you for this question. This is going to be the biggest issue that we have to deal with in the legislature over the next 2 years. As a legislative aide from 2007 to 2012, I worked down there when we had $100 and more a barrel oil. And at $120, we can fund a lot of great projects. But knowing that the price of oil was going to crash in the future, we didn't create a long-term fiscal plan that allowed us to get off that fossil fuel roller coaster and get off of boom and bust budgeting to be able to plan sustainably going into the future. I believe we need to find ways to bring more oil revenue into Alaska through new fields and a new tax regime that brings that for a long-term source of revenue for the state, because we need to take that oil money and from their extractive resources and invest it either into the permanent fund or into a fund that helps earn revenue for capital projects and fund the operating budget in other ways as well. Because the better we can plan out ahead, the better Alaska's economy and Alaska's families are going to be in the long term. We can't just pretend like oil is going to save us again, because it will have the rug ripped out from under us again in the future. And when we have candidates and we have entire caucuses in Juneau saying we have to give a full permanent fund dividend, how are you going to pay for that? If somebody's telling you that they're going to give you a full dividend and then they're going to also give you all of the services, that's both budgeting. That's not real math, because if they're going to either cut the budget to pay for that, they're going to be cutting nearly a third of our state's budget and all those services, or they're going to have to raid the permanent fund. And over the last 2 years, I was proud to have defended against those raids on the permanent fund, along with many other people in Juneau, to protect that critical fund so that we can have any semblance of a long-term fiscal plan. Looking down the line is something Alaska needs to do. We haven't had the opportunity to do that in the future, in the past, because we've ridden that fossil fuel roller coaster. So, it's easy to just spend the money that comes in and not have that fiscal restraint on ourselves as legislators. But making those hard choices is what people elect us to do. And, we did that these last 2 years. And I think we have to take that next step with a new dividend formula and a long-term fiscal plan that's going to get us across the hump.
Thank you. And then we move on to Jeremiah Humans.
Thank you. I want to reiterate what Rep. Hopkins said, that this is going to be the largest issue that we're going to face in Juneau. But Alaska needs a long-term fiscal plan, and we need to have more revenue. That's just the end of the story. There is no math that's going to keep the budget the same and pay for the services and pay for the permanent fund without some new form of revenue. The math just does not work. And we also need to follow the permanent fund dividend formula and not use that as a replacement for a progressive income tax. When we use the permanent fund earnings to balance the budget, it is the largest regressive tax that you could have on low-income Alaskans. Instead of having a regressive tax that disproportionately affects low-income and middle-income Alaskans, we need to have a progressive income tax that is equitable and fair for all Alaskans. Because that is the question you need to ask if, someone is talking about how they're going to balance the budget without new revenues, is who is going to pay for it? Thank you.
Thank you. So if we are ready, we are going to move on to a tribal sovereignty question. And it reads, Alaska Native hunting and fishing practices, including the harvesting and sharing of fish, game, and other resources, and the ceremonies which accompany these practices are essential to the social, cultural, spiritual, and economic well-being and survival of Alaska Native people. Alaska current federal state dual management system does not include Alaska Native tribal participation. Without appropriate representation and reform to the Alaska hunting and fishing management system, Alaska Native well-being will continue to be at risk. How do you propose to fix this injustice? And let's start right out the gate with Julia with Julia Nalika.
Thank you very much. I just want to share a personal anecdote about this. This summer, we have a permit hunt down in the Nenana region. And because of COVID, they decided to move the permit hunt onto an online process, which absolutely makes sense because typically people from all around Alaska would come and actually camp outside of our tribal hall to get this moose permit. So they were keeping us safe, but there was a huge thing that was overlooked, a huge factor. I know of at least 10 computers in Nenana who all logged in at 9 a.m. on the dot when the permitting process opened. And at that time, all of the permits were gone because Fish and Game did not consider the fact that Nenana and other rural areas would have slower broadband and would not be able to capture the permits for this process. So this is what I believe needs to happen. Our state needs to stop fighting the tribes. They need to start talking to them. They need to start figuring out solutions to work together. I understand that this stems from our constitutional non-discrimination clause. But at this point, it has become such an adversarial relationship that things are not working anymore for our tribes and for our areas. Our AC boards need to have better communication. Our Fish and Game need to be reaching out to our tribes and talking to them about the management in their areas. They need to be talking to elders. They need to be talking to citizen scientists, and they need to keep those communication lines open and encourage them to be able to talk. Somebody counting from an airplane is not going to know the entire picture, but the people who spend time on the land, hunting, fishing, exploring, and just enjoying that connection to the land, those are the people who have a lot more knowledge about what is happening in our regions with migration, with animal impacts, and with our climate impacts as well. So what kind of representation and reform? We need to have citizen scientists, and elders on our boards to make sure that all of the voices of Alaskans are being heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Quist. Same question.
Thank you. So yeah, we need to have non-consumptive representation on our boards because I mean, it's not all about hunting and fishing, and even when it is about hunting and fishing, it needs to be taken into account that we need to have a sustainable plan, and we need to also take into account that tourism is a big part of, our wildlife management. When it comes to tribal relations, these need to be government to government conversations. These need to be two sovereign entities talking to each other. And so those are the broad strokes. I would associate myself with these other answers as well, but we need to have non-consumptive representation. We need to have tribal representation, and we need to be thinking about this in a state to state type relationship when it comes to the state of Alaska and tribal entities. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Christopher. And Grier, same question.
Thank you. This is certainly a timely question, as I believe it reflects on the federal subsistence hunting board that shut down the hunts for Alaskans along the Denali Highway. Not saying that was the right or wrong move, but it created conflict with our state that we're now suing the federal government over again. And I believe if we can avoid those fights by solving this at our state level and going forward, that's going to be the right solution. But we as politicians and as elected officials, we can't assume that we have all the answers. And I promise you, I don't know what a perfect solution is to this. But what I do know is that we have to listen to those people who are on the ground, the indigenous Alaskans who have been living on this land for thousands of years. We have to listen to them about what they say their needs are to fill their freezer, because we need to worry about what goes into Alaskans' freezers before we worry about what goes on to a trophy wall in somebody's house outside. And that has to be where our priority is, and that comes from the people that have been taking their subsistence and their traditional rights, a subsistence right and priority that I absolutely support here in Alaska when it comes to harvesting our fish and game. I was proud to have supported the first ever Tribal Affairs Committee in Alaska. That brought forward incredibly important issues like tribal sovereignty, like missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and brought those issues forward. But it also was a platform for discussing issues like this that otherwise would have been buried among oil tax revenue questions and budget questions in the Resource Committee. So developing that platform so that we as legislators can listen and can understand what the real impacts are is absolutely critical. On a side note, for listening to local voices, we eliminated the coastal zone management plan committees a number of years back, somewhere in the last decade or so. And that took away the voice of people on the ground when it came to developing their resources, and took away their voice for making sure they're heard in the development of our resources and the harvesting of our resources. And I believe that was the wrong approach. I voted against that at the ballot box then. So we as legislators need to remember we have to listen, and we have to understand a bigger picture than just what our district says, which is absolutely important, but we're in this together as Alaska.
Okay, Jeremiah Humans, same question.
All right, thank you. I kind of have to echo a lot of the similar responses. The lack of Native representation on the fish and game boards on both the federal and the state level, cuts them out entirely of any discussion, and we need to work on a government-to-government basis to improve that system. But the federal and state dual management also creates other problems as well. For example, the issues on the Pinnell Mountain Trail during the 40-mile caribou hunt this year, with the destruction of the trail by ATVs on BLM land, and the complication between, what is BLM land on the trails and what's state land. The other thing is we're going to need to work with the federal government on the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act. That is what was supposed to be help fix this problem when substance rights were extinguished by the NCSA. So we need to work together on a government-to-government basis to improve this system. And I agree with Christopher about putting non-consumptive users on the Fish and Game Board as part of, you know, making sure we get the maximum benefit of our resources. Thank you.
Okay, great. Next question. I think we have 2 more questions for you tonight. Let's start with Greyer this time. The Department of Commerce, Alaska Energy Authority, has focused on the goal of 50% of electricity generation from renewable resources by 2025. What are your plans to help the state of Alaska to achieve that goal?
Thank you, Alex. And first time I get to go first. I was the chair of the House Special Committee on Energy for the last 2 years. And I worked across the political aisle and across the body aisle into the, with the Senate, and was able to pass what became Senate Bill 123, which is Alaska's first real long-term energy plan that doesn't write the plan, but it brings utilities together for the first time in Alaska's history to plan together. It creates that integrated resource plan that will show us a roadmap, and it will be a living document that can develop as new technologies come online to lower the cost for energy for Alaskans, but it also opens up access for independent power producers to bring more renewable energy online, because now it was called an open access tariff, but you can generate wind power in Delta and sell it to Homer now without having the rates and tariffs increase as those electrons move along the power lines. That was an effort nearly 40 years in the making, and it was the work that came before me that made it possible, but bringing that plan online and passing that bill was the first big step to actually bringing 50% renewables by 2025, which was passed again when I was a staff about 10 years ago. We put that into place. At the time, it was sort of a plan to build the Susitna Dam, and was trumpeted as that. The Susitna Dam would certainly get us very close to that 50% renewables, but is putting all of our eggs in one basket, one energy basket, the right answer? Or do we need to be more flexible and have more localized renewable energies systems around the rail belt and around Alaska? That's something that the rest of the world is moving towards, and we held a committee hearing about a month and a half ago, and heard from the Regulatory Assistance Project experts who do just this around the world. And they said, Susitna might get you there, but what happens if those power lines coming out of Susitna go down because of an earthquake? How are you going to bring in those new industries who want that power and need that power if they can't rely on the power lines coming out of one large project? So finding ways to bring large-scale renewable energy projects online is going to take planning in the long term. So a broken clock is right twice a day, and I agree that with Governor Dunleavy that we need to look at expansions to the Bradley Creek hydro project down right outside of Homer to generate dozens more megawatts of power through renewable energy, and allow for the entrepreneurship of independent power producers, or help projects like Solarize Goldstream and Solarize Fairbanks and Solarize Anchorage to help develop more of those plans. It's going to take a lot of us together, but I was proud to take that first step.
Thank you, Greyer. We're going to move on to Christopher Chris next. Same question.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Representative Hawkins said, I mean, we need to think about big projects and small projects. Alaska is a big state with a diverse set of resources, and as a result, we have a lot of different possibilities to generate energy. And if you look at a state like Washington that decades ago invested in significant hydroelectric projects, they're still reaping the benefits of that investment. So, whether it's the Susitna Dam or it's something, totally new like tidal power, or if it's, hydroelectric from a river, those are the kinds of things that we need to be looking at. I think that the future is increasingly decentralized with smaller and more innovative energy generation projects. So the state needs to invest in those big projects to help push them along, and the state needs to grease the wheels or get out of the way on these smaller efforts. I mean, we have a lot of enterprising people here in Alaska, whether it's wind in Delta or biomass projects otherwise in the interior, helping those projects get off the ground and get that energy into the rail belt grid is going to make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Julia Nelica, over to you.
Thank you very much. I actually want to quote Governor Dunleavy to start out this answer. Governor Dunleavy, in a letter to Warren Buffett, stated that, transitioning Alaska to clean, reliable, inexpensive electricity is one of the greatest things we could do to attract additional investment, diversify and grow our economy, and lower the economic burden on Alaskans empowering their homes and businesses. I absolutely agree. Why is this a private letter? Why isn't this a public statement? We need to be moving towards renewable energies. We need to stop being afraid of extractive industries and the power that they claim that they hold over us. Yes, we have had oil give us a lot of economic drivers, but it is also time now to start looking in other directions. And like was mentioned before, Alaska has so many sources of energy, from hydro, solar, wind, thermal. We need to be, and we are capturing these things. There are projects all over the state. In Nenana, they're actually looking at putting in a solar farm 15 times the size of the one in Willow. These projects are happening, but we need to make sure that there is an agency who is pulling them all together, making sure that they're communicating across and learning from one another. So this is something that I don't know if anybody is familiar, I hope you're familiar with the IGAP program, which is by the EPA that works with tribes. I know that the IGAP coordinator out in Beaver, Alaska, they are working on solar projects and wind projects. We have small projects going on all over the state. We need to be looking at the Eklutna Hydro project, and we need to be sharing this information and technology and not hiding it in the shadows. This does not need to be a private conversation. This needs to be a conversation that we are all having together, and that our administrations are also leading the way on. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jeremiah Humans, let's wrap it up with you.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is an important question, especially like the quote that Julia said from Governor Dunleavy, that this clean renewable energy is going to drive industries to Alaska. Alaska has the opportunity to be a premier computing data center location. We have a great location between the West Coast and Asia, and it requires infrastructure to do that, whether it's broadband, running our own undersea cables or overland cables like MTA recently ran, but it also requires clean renewable energy. Facebook came out and they are building data centers in Sweden right now because they have the ability to have 100% clean renewable energy. They have hydroelectric power plants that are providing basically only energy for those Facebook servers, and they're using the natural environment of it being cold to help keep those servers cold by just fanning in the cold air into the data center, and then just having electricity to keep those powered. So getting clean renewable energy is our path forward to increasing investment in our state. Thank you.
Andrea, would you like to ask the last question?
I believe do we have another question after this one? But we are going to keep going. The next question is this. It is the state's responsibility to provide public safety for all Alaskans. Our state is currently failing in this regard. Only 1 in 3 villages have any public safety. Alaska has some of the highest rates of missing and murdered indigenous women and girls in the nation. Fairbanks in particular has seen numerous of our mothers or daughters, sisters, and aunties go missing. What are you going to do to make Alaskans more safe? And let's go ahead and start with Christopher Chris.
Thank you. It's appalling that we have so many communities in the state that have little, none, or inadequate public safety officers. We need to support the Village Public Safety Officer Program. We need to make sure that troopers are adequately funded and trained. We need to make sure that municipalities like the city of Fairbanks are adequately supported so that their police forces are adequately funded and trained so that they can, and that the people that staff those forces also need to be representative of those communities that they serve. So this is a critical issue that needs attention, and the biggest part of this, I think, is making sure that these services are adequately funded. That's in the short term. We can take a lot of the pressures off of these systems in the long term by investing in education now. I mean, Representative Hopkins mentioned earlier that one of the few state budgets, parts of the budget that's growing, that non-formula driven growth, is corrections. The state of Alaska spends more on corrections. The state investment in corrections is larger than the state investment on education when you break it down by who's incarcerated or number of students. I mean, it's just backwards. If we invest in education now, we can cut the corrections budget. We can use that money instead in a proactive and preemptive way to make sure that our communities are safe and healthy, and that our public safety officers are paid adequately so that we can attract and retain quality talent, that they are trained adequately so that they can serve the communities in lawful and productive ways, and that those folks are representative of the communities that they serve. Thank you.
Jeremiah Humans, your view.
All right. Yeah, I think that this is one of the crises in the state is public safety. We need to look at the outcomes that we're investing. We're investing, a large portion of our budget onto Department of Public Safety and the Department of Corrections, but we're not getting good value for that expenditure. And we need to figure out a better way to move forward. And the way to do that is to preemptively keep people out of the school to prison pipeline, and to get people out of dealing with the criminal justice system. And that's going to take investment in housing, in food, in education, and all of the underlined. We're going to have to, but we need to invest in the programs that are working, like the VPSO program, and get people into those positions that need to, to provide public safety to the state. Yeah, thank you.
Have to unmute myself here. So we're going to go on to Julia Nalika. Same question.
Thank you very much. The VPSO program is not working. The VPSO program is in shambles. It is continually, the budget is cut because they are not able to fill these officer positions because of the restrictive funding and the patronage that has been put on top of it. The VPSO program needs to be completely revamped, and I am committed to making that one of my first priorities in Juneau. We need to make sure that we have people from our communities who know us, who understand us, and who love us, who are also our law enforcement. We do not need to have experiences like I did a few summers ago when I was able to tie up a boat that had drifted downriver, and my experience with the troopers was racist, cruel, and very discriminatory towards the people in my community. We in the interior have 3, and I'm sure I'm missing more, but there are people that I know that are missing. From my own hometown, Frank Manano is missing. A woman named Debbie Nicktoon is missing, and also a gentleman who has ties to Nenana, Doran Sanford, is missing. Why haven't our people been found? Why are we still battling this crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women? How are we not making this the #1 priority for our citizens to feel safe within their state, not just for their persons, but also for their possessions? We need to be combating not only the violence and fear, but also the substance abuse problem in our state. And that means bringing programs like restorative justice and compacting with tribes to have tribal court power so that we can talk to our own citizens, so that we can bring them back from the brink. We need to be proactive. We need to make sure that our people feel supported. We need to not treat victims of crime and violence as if they're the perpetrators, putting them on display, treating them like their words and their experiences don't matter. We need to protect our people, and that is my #1 priority when I get to Juneau. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Okay, Grier Hopkins.
Thank you, Julia, for putting a name to the people in your community and across the state who have gone missing and who have come up murdered. Thank you for saying their name and speaking that to power. For too long, she's right. It does get brushed under the rug. Many times out in rural Alaska, where it's a small percentage of the people in our state who live this every day, yet Fairbanks is an epicenter for it, but we don't hear about it here because we think it's another problem. We think it's a problem somewhere else. And, you know, we work in Juneau and we passed a lot of good sex crimes legislation to help create stronger penalties to help turn that around, but it's not going to be the solution to this pandemic of crime and murder. And it's devastating too many of our communities. That tribal affairs committee that I was talking about created the first resolution in our state's history to bring attention to this, and had the entire legislature go through their luncheons to let us know as legislators what this problem is. But you know, I don't live this every day, like I said. We have to listen and understand what the solutions are from the people in the villages, because you know, we do need more law enforcement in rural Alaska. Absolutely. They have to be able to have somebody to call who's there in the village and doesn't take days to fly out there like a state trooper does right now, because we don't have the resources to fund these positions. But we also don't have the capacity to find people to fill a lot of these positions of VPSOs around Alaska, because it's so difficult to be called on a domestic violence situation for your cousin or for your uncle or from somebody in your family. So how do we solve that problem and bridge that gap to make the VPSO a more successful and sustainable problem? We have to listen to the people in these villages for what that solution and what that recruitment process is going to look like. You know, the federal government just opened up a cold case office in Alaska. I hope it stays, and I hope it does its job. But another thing we have to do is we have to recruit from more from here in Alaska to our state troopers, because too often people come from outside, and then part of their first few years of duty is to go to a rural village, whether it's Bethel or Nome or a hub or a small village, and live there and be the law enforcement in that office. But they don't understand the generational trauma that has gone on in that village by the police forces there and in Fairbanks and places. So how do we recruit a more diverse police force here in Alaska to make sure that it is successful and turns the tide of this horrible pandemic of our missing and murdered Indigenous girls and women?
Okay, thank you. You know, we have exactly just enough time to go through one more question. If you'll bear with us, we do have just the perfect amount of time to do that. So, Julia Nelika, this is a question for you. You're going to start us off. This is a question about COVID. The COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted the barriers Alaskans have to voting access and information. What are your thoughts around a vote-by-mail electoral system for future state elections?
Vote by mail is a really, really important part of our democracy that needs to be protected. We also need to be able to, when we live in rural areas, when we don't have a national holiday to vote on, when it becomes restrictive for people to be able to access polls, we need to make sure that we protect mail-in ballots. There is such a low, negligible rate of any sort of fraud with mail-in voting that the arguments against it are ridiculous. Our people who have more than one job, they have children at home, they have tasks and chores that they need to get done. How can we expect them on a Tuesday to go wait in line, or whatever day their municipal elections are? We need to make sure that people have access not only to mail-in voting, but also to the online voting as well. And we need to make sure that these systems are safe. We need to make sure that our post office is delivering ballots on time. My friend who lives here in Fairbanks received his municipal ballot yesterday, the day after the elections. When I talked to my postmaster down in Nenana, he told me that this slowness of mail isn't true. It isn't happening. But I witnessed it with my friend. We need to make sure that our post office is protected from politics. We need to make sure our division of elections is not kicked around with different administrations. We need to make sure that these rules and regulations are enshrined so that they are not encroaching upon our right to vote. So please exercise your right to vote, whether it be through mail-in ballots, early voting, online, or in person. Thank you.
Yeah. And let's propose that same question to you, Christopher Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great question because, I mean, so the pandemic is obviously a barrier to voting for a lot of folks who want to do the right thing and socially distance, or are sensitive in a sensitive group and are at a high risk if they go out and vote in person. And but it's highlighted a lot of problems that we have with the current system, which disenfranchises people, working families that can't make it to the polls on a Tuesday. Anything that we can do to reduce these barriers, to advocate for more access to voting, the better. I mean, as elected officials or aspiring elected officials, we need to be able to be held accountable, and that's best done at the ballot box by everybody who wants to vote being able to vote. And so a vote by mail system is a great way to do that. And I think that it needs to come from the state level down. You know, we had an ordinance to do that here in the borough a couple of years ago. It was defeated, and I think rightly so, because I think this needs to be a coordinated effort from the state. Anchorage has recently put a significant investment in a facility to process ballots by mail, and that is something that the state can rent and use, and that's something that we can do. And there obviously are security issues when it comes to any ballot, but you know, and those are different issues for vote by mail than they are by voting in person. And in a lot of ways, voting by mail is actually more secure. You know, there are more steps of review on each ballot, and so I'm a big fan of making sure that folks vote. I mean, one of the reasons that I'm happily a member of the Alaska Democratic Party and proud to be an Interior Democrat is that a big part of what we fight for is voting rights and access to the polls. And it's the 21st century, and there's no reason that we can't be voting by every means possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeremiah Humans.
Thank you. I think we're all going to echo the same thoughts here, or almost. I definitely agree that we need to, move forward to a vote by mail system. We've seen kind of the issues, revolving around elections in the state and the primary. For example, election workers didn't even show up at a native village. 100 people were disenfranchised because of the failure of the Division of Elections to know that there were people there. So we need to make sure that we're expanding voter access as much as we can, because everyone has the right to vote and they should be voting. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I yield the floor to you, Representative Hopkins.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you to all the other panelists and candidates today for speaking on this important issue, because I completely agree. We had, I believe it was House Bill 115 that we were able to pass through the State House that would have allowed for a simple little checkbox on the the absentee voter application that says, I want to be a permanent absentee voter. Currently now, you have to check that box and reapply every single election. And you have to do it at the municipal election too. We're making voting harder. And unfortunately, that bill died in the Senate because voting by mail and voter enfranchisement is unfortunately a political issue. And I don't believe it should be. It is one of our foundational rights as Americans and as Alaskans to have equal and accessible access to the ballot box, not a voter tax, or like we have, like I see it as so many villages that don't have a polling location or a precinct location. They have to either vote by mail or they have to fly to another place. That's putting barriers on Alaskans. We need to maybe we should look at an expansive approach to this where it's a state voting rights act, where we put into law the rights that citizens have to be able to have access to voting of all different types. Because I don't believe we should go to vote by mail system only. I believe we need to have as many different options to vote as we can. Like Julia was talking about in rural Alaska, the voting system and the mail system is slow. I have to send mail for my day job out to villages across Alaska, and it can take weeks for a simple package to get there, even when we're not inundated with additional vote by mail ballots. So it is not okay to have that as the only system. How do we allow for that? How do we allow for email voting, which was taken off the books a few years ago? We even almost took vote by fax off the opportunity, off the table for people to be able to vote with. I'm glad that didn't make it all the way through. I don't think the Russians are gonna intercept a fax and Photoshop an individual ballot and send it out back to the Division of Elections. That seems pretty labor intensive for trying to actually influence elections. Much easier ways on Facebook that we've seen. This was something that was a passion to me going down to Juneau. It was something that I was incredibly proud to co-sponsor and fight for, and I had to keep needling the sponsor of the bill to make sure it got to the floor. It did, it died. I'm gonna pick that fight back up in January because voting is too important to make it harder. It needs to be easier across the board.
Thanks so much. So we are going to move now into closing statements. But before we do, I do want to express my gratitude to all of our panelists for the generous responses and for generously sharing their time with us tonight. And especially to all of you, I'd like to express some thanks for just being willing to run for public office. I appreciate that. So we're going to move into closing statements now. Really, this is your opportunity to give kind of an elevator pitch. We're going to give you each a minute. We have time, I think, for each of you. Take a minute. And this is just your opportunity, your last chance tonight to speak to folks who may be listening or watching and just explain to them why they should consider voting for you. Why don't we start with Jeremiah Humans?
Yeah, thank you. I also want to thank everyone for hosting this. This has been a a very informative time. And I want to thank all the other candidates for showing up. I think that it really shows you look at which candidates are here and which ones don't want to answer to their constituents. But my elevator pitch is this. Alaska has a large number of crises that we're talking about right now, and we won't be able to solve them without a long-term fiscal plan and new revenue. Any other discussion needs to happen after we figure out how we're going to pay for these things in the state. Anyone who's pushing for just budget cuts and draining the ERA are not long-term solutions to Alaska's problems. We need to have a long-term fiscal plan and a long-term outlook to be able to provide the best services for the state. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and have Christopher Chris.
Thank you very much. It's a little disappointing tonight to not have all the candidates here, and I was surprised to see that Representative LeBon decided not to join us. These are important issues, and these are, in a lot of ways, I mean, the fact that these issues need to be discussed, that's not controversial. And somebody who is representing all the constituents in the district, I think, needs to be accountable and needs to be out here. I'm glad that I'm here. I'm grateful to the Alaska Center and others for putting this forum on. This is a critical election, and our state is at a crossroads. And the reason I'm running is to fight for a sensible plan for our state, to fight for education and access to education, pre-K to university to vocational schools, and to fight for environmental justice for all of us here in Alaska, to fight for environmental justice for those that are most impacted, those most vulnerable here in our city and in our state. So I am asking for your support and for your vote this November. If you'd like to learn more about the campaign, we're on Facebook. The website is quistforhouse.com. If you'd like to make a donation, that is greatly appreciated. If you want to contact me, my number is on the website and on Facebook, 687-5049. Give me a call anytime. I'd be very happy to hear your thoughts and discuss with you your vision for the future of Fairbanks and our state. And thank you again for the opportunity to discuss these important issues with you tonight.
Great. Over to you, Julia Nelica.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Alaska Center for putting this together. Thank you to the other panelists. Thank you so much for your moderation. And thank you for the questions. Those were all very thought-provoking, invigorating, and exciting questions, because I truly believe that here in Alaska, we come from an abundant land, resilient, hardworking people, and we should not be made to feel afraid for our future. Yes, we are facing a budget crisis. Yes, we are facing a public school crisis. Yes, we are facing a law enforcement crisis, or excuse me, public safety. We need to address all of these with long-term thinking solutions. But in the short term, we need to address our fiscal crisis. And the way that we need to do that is we need to make sure that we are getting our maximum benefit from our resources that all Alaskans own. I believe that we also need to break down the silos of information between our agencies. Too often there is redundancy, and that we are seeing an increase in administration due to the hoops that our small communities, that our schools, and that our businesses need to jump through to be able to secure the financing that they need, the grants that they need, and to be able to run their day-to-day operations. We need to figure out how to move forward with a less restrictive block grants. We need to make sure that we are trusting our communities and our leaders and our people to use the money that they need for their for their lives, for their job force, for their education as they see fit. We need to trust one another and work as a very large community across a vast and beautiful state. I want to represent the rural interior, which stretches from Cantwell to Tanana to Arctic Village to the Canadian border and then down to the Copper Center, a size larger than the state of Arizona, because this is our region, this is my region, and I believe that I will listen and represent the people of the interior. Please follow along with my campaign at juliaalaska.com. I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Julia4Alaska. It's going to be a really exciting 26 days, 27, oh, I don't know, ahead. And you know, I'm learning with you. So please give me a call, reach out to me. My number is 907-378-6378. I want to listen to you and I want to continue this conversation, and please send me to Juno. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And so I want to yield this time to Representative Hopkins. Bring us home.
All right, thank you, Andrea. I want to thank the panelists again for excellent questions, like Julia said. Alex, thank you for your work up at the Poli-Sci department at the university and training so many of our interns that come down there to do amazing work in the halls of Juneau and continue to grow and show us what the future looks like and what we need to do and keep our feet grounded. And Alyssa and Andrea, thank you both for your work putting this together. I know that campaigning is a family job. I know that well. Christopher Quist knows that well. Julia knows that well. Jeremiah, assume you do too. I just haven't met the rest of your family yet, but you know, it takes a village to run these campaigns, and it takes a lot of different approaches and different people to put our state on the right track going forward. And you know, I went down to Juneau trying to make a difference, but I went down there without trying to make a name for myself or anybody, because you know, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And being able to put aside a lot of our differences to find those common goals, whether it's a fiscal plan, whether it's, you know, defending against bills that would create even more social injustices than we live with today, and trying to stop more of those from coming online. Those are the things that we can do if we put aside the smaller differences and work together to solve the bigger problems. You know, this was my first political forum of the year so far, and I learned that I need a ring light on my computer so you can see me better. And but I appreciate this. It finally feels like I'm in the middle of a campaign, having talked to plenty of voters, raised enough money. This is my first forum of the year. I want to go back down to Juneau. I want to earn your vote by putting those big issues forward, and I want to make sure I'm accessible as well. You can find me on my website, GrierHopkins.com, Facebook, but also feel free to call me on my cell phone at 347-2101. That's 347-2101. You can find it on my Facebook page. I've been posting it against plenty of the trolls on the ads. So thank you again, everybody. I appreciate your time today on these important, huge issues for our state. Now let's go down to Juneau and finish the work that we started.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to reach out to each of you and to say, please embody this thought process. Each one of you, as I look at you with your tenacity and with your strength and with the issues that you're passionate about, you represent hope. And if nothing else, that's what keeps us going. So please embody that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to have Kango share some voting information again, and then we will close off all together. Kango, take it away.
Hey everyone, I just want to thank you everyone again for sharing your thoughts today. My name is Kango. I work at the Alaska Center along with Alyssa. Shout out to Alyssa again for spending so much time and energy to organize these forums. And this is all really dear to my heart because I grew up in House District 4. So thanks again. I'm just going to be sharing some sort of basic election information just to make sure everyone on the call knows how to vote, when to vote, and all that good stuff. So let's just take a look at the election timeline right now. A lot of you probably finished voting in the statewide municipal elections this past weekend. We also just passed the last day to register to vote. October 19th, that's when early voting is going to start. October 24th is the last day to request an absentee ballot for vote by mail. And then November 3rd is election day, so all ballots are due. Next slide. If you want to check your voter information, like where's your polling place, the status of your absentee ballot, if you requested it. I know a lot of folks have received it in the past couple of days. You can go to myvoterinformation.alaska.gov. I would encourage anyone, if you think you're not registered, to check this. A lot of people are registered through automatic registration, even if they might have not registered themselves. Cool. Next one. There's 3 main ways to vote. Voting absentee by mail. That means you have to go to the Division of Elections to request a ballot by October 24th. You can vote early, that's in person at an early vote location near you. That's between October 19th and November 3rd. And you can always vote on election day in person at your polling place. And you can double check where that is by going to that last link I sent you. Next one. So how do you vote by mail this coming election? Again, request a ballot by October 24th. Very important deadline. They'll send it to you. You can fill it out at home, take your time researching. You do need a witness in order to be able to turn it back in. So make sure that you have someone contacted for that. And then you'll return your ballot through your mail, or you can also bring it to your polling place. They have a drop box there. If you return it by mail, it's 1 stamp, 1 forever stamp, or 55 cents. And next one. I think the best way to make sure that you know exactly what's going to be on your ballot is to go search your sample ballot. So if you know which district you live in, go to the elections website and you can see like exactly what's going to be on your ballot. This is a really good way to see sort of, what you're going to be voting on. But next slide. Just, everyone make sure that you know what you're going to be voting on for president and vice president, U.S. House Representative, U.S. Senator, and our state House reps and state senators that we heard from today, state judges, and ballot measure 1 and 2. You'll see all of that on your ballot. And next. Just sharing you all a couple of resources that you can use to help get out the vote in your community. We have a Make a Plan to Vote worksheet. The link should be in your chat. That goes through all these questions that I talked about. And the next one. And you can also go to Election Center at nativepeoplesaction.org. They're one of the co-hosts of tonight's event, and they have a really incredible tool on their website to help people make a plan to vote. But that's it for me, and I think I'll pass it back to the hosts. But thanks for having us, and I've really enjoyed tonight's conversation.
Great, thank you, Kengo. And so I just want to thank you and to everyone for participating. Thank you to our candidates for running. We only have a choice of the candidates that put themselves out there and run. So thank you for your commitment and leadership that takes. And thank you for engaging with your potential constituents on topics that are important to them. And thank you all for watching. An engaged and educated electorate is one of the cornerstones holding this system together. So thank you for taking the time to make an informed decision. And thank you so much to our partners, and thank you to our moderators. These forums have been so successful because of your skill and ease, and we thank you. So with that, we will say goodbye and remind everyone to vote by November 3rd. Thank you so much.